She didn't fall slowly. She crashed tray glasses everything straight into the chest of the most feared man in Chicago, and the entire restaurant went silent, like someone had cut the sound out of the world. Damian Valenti didn't move. He just looked down at the woman crumpled against him, her uniform soaked in red wine, her body completely limp. And then his hand touched her arm to steady her, and he felt it. Something hard. Something hidden beneath the fabric. Something that had no business being on a waitress. If this story already has your heart racing, subscribe to this channel, hit the bell, and follow every part until the very end. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. The Bellecourt was the kind of restaurant where the wine cost more than most people's weekly groceries, and the lighting was deliberately dim so that the powerful men who dined there could conduct their business without anyone looking too closely at their faces. The staff knew the rules. You moved quietly. You kept your eyes down. You remembered orders without writing them on a pad because pads looked unprofessional. And above all else, you never under any circumstances let a single thing go wrong. Lena Carter had worked there for 11 months and had never broken a single rule. Until tonight. She had been on her feet since 6 in the morning. Not at Bellecourt. Bellecourt didn't open until 5 in the evening. Before Bellecourt, she had worked a breakfast shift at a diner off Michigan Avenue where the cook called her sweetheart and the tips averaged $2 a table. After the diner, she had spent 3 hours cleaning offices in a building downtown where nobody looked at her or spoke to her except to tell her she had missed a spot. And then she had changed into her Bellecourt uniform in a bathroom stall on the 3rd floor, repinned her hair in the mirror above the sink, and told her reflection to hold it together for 4 more hours. 4 more hours, Lena. Just 4 more hours. Her brother Marcus had a consultation with his specialist on Thursday. The appointment cost $340 that insurance didn't cover. She had $260 saved. She needed the rest by Wednesday. She could do 4 more hours. The dining room filled up the way it always did on Friday nights, slowly at first, then all at once. Tables of businessmen in suits. A birthday party near the back wall. 2 couples celebrating something that required champagne. Lena moved through all of it, automatically taking orders, delivering plates, refilling glasses, smiling at things that weren't funny, and nodding at things that didn't require a response. Her feet had stopped hurting somewhere around hour 9. When pain crossed a certain threshold, it stopped registering as pain and just became the background noise of existing. At 8:17, her manager Gerald appeared at her shoulder. Gerald was a small man with large opinions about every single thing, and he communicated almost exclusively through his eyebrows. One raised meant, "Hurry up." Both raised meant you've made a serious mistake, and the particular configuration he was wearing right now, which involved both eyebrows drawn together in a single panicked line, meant something Lena had never seen before. "Private dining room," he said. "Tonight." Lena blinked. "I'm already carrying 4 tables. I'll reassign 2 of them. Valenti's here." The name landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. She watched it ripple across the faces of the 2 waitstaff standing nearby. One of them, a young man named Danny, who had been working at Bellecourt for only 3 weeks, actually took a half-step backward. "I don't know who that is," Lena said. Gerald stared at her as though she had announced she didn't know who the president was. "Damian Valenti. He books the private room 6 times a year. Nobody talks to him unless he speaks first. Nobody refills his glass without asking. Nobody." Gerald's voice dropped to something barely above a breath. "Nobody asks him anything personal. You go in, you serve, you leave. You are invisible. Do you understand me?" "I understand." "Good." He paused. "Also, don't drop anything." She almost said, "When have I ever dropped anything?" But Gerald was already walking away, straightening his jacket like a man preparing to face a firing squad. Lena picked up the private room service folder from the host stand and opened it. The menu was already chosen, 4 courses, pre-selected wine pairings confirmed. The kitchen would handle timing. All she had to do was carry plates from point A to point B and make herself disappear in between. 4 more hours. She pushed open the door to the private dining room at 8:22. There were 4 men at the table. 3 of them she recognized the way you recognize furniture present unremarkable part of the background. The 4th one she recognized the way you recognize a change in air pressure before a storm. Damien Valenti was not the largest man in the room, and he was not the loudest, and he wasn't doing anything that should have made him stand out. He was simply sitting at the head of the table with his jacket still on his hands folded in front of him, listening to the man on his left speak. But there was a quality to his stillness that the other 3 men didn't have. The quality of something that had never needed to prove itself. The quality of absolute unperformed authority. Hal was younger than she had expected. Mid-40s maybe. Dark hair with the first threads of gray at the temples. A face that had been handsome once, and was now something more than handsome. Harder, more specific, carved by whatever the last 20 years had required of him. His eyes were the color of deep water, and moved with the slow, deliberate precision of someone who noticed everything and forgot nothing. He did not look up when she entered. She was grateful for that. Lena set down the first course with the practiced silence she had spent months perfecting. She moved around the table, clockwise, placed each plate without a sound, refilled water glasses without being asked, and kept her face in the pleasant neutral expression that meant, I am not really here, I am just an extension of the service. It was working. Nobody at the table acknowledged her. The conversation continued something about a shipping contract, the numbers too technical for her to follow, and too private for her to care about. She was almost done. She just needed to place the last plate, remove the empty breadbasket from the center of the table, and exit. The breadbasket was on Damien Valenti's left side. She reached for it carefully. Her hand trembled. She had been noticing the trembling for about an hour now, the kind of full-body tremor that came from too little food and too many hours, and the specific exhaustion that lived somewhere below the muscles down in the marrow. She had managed it through sheer force of will for most of the evening. She managed it now by gripping the breadbasket harder, which was a mistake, because the additional tension traveled up her arm and rattled the tray balanced in her other hand, and one of the water glasses on the tray shifted, and Damien Valenti looked up. Their eyes met for exactly 1 second. She looked away immediately, fixed her grip, steadied the tray, moved back toward the door with the careful, deliberate steps of someone navigating a frozen lake. She made it out. She stood in the service corridor for a moment with her back against the wall, and her eyes closed, breathing through her nose, the way she did when her body started threatening to give up before her mind was ready to let it. 1 down, 3 courses to go. She went back in for the second course 20 minutes later. By the third course, the trembling had gotten worse. She knew it objectively, the way you know a tire is going flat. Even while you keep driving, you can feel the wrongness of it, the increasing drag, the way things that should be automatic are starting to require conscious effort. Lifting the tray required concentration now. Keeping her face neutral required calculation. The 30 feet between the service corridor and the private dining room felt like a distance that had to be negotiated rather than walked. She made it through the third course. She stood in the corridor afterward and pressed her forehead against the cool wall and said quietly to nobody, 1 more, just 1 more. The dessert plates were lighter than the dinner plates. That was the thing she focused on as she picked up the final tray. Lighter. Easier. She just had to get through 1 more rotation around that table, and then she was done, and she could go to the staff bathroom and sit down for 5 minutes and eat the half sandwich she had left in her locker at 7 hours ago. She pushed open the door to the private dining room. 3 of the 4 men were gone. Only Damien Valenti remained. Hal was alone at the table with a glass of wine and a folder open in front of him, and he was reading with the concentrated attention of a man who had learned to use every available moment. He didn't look up when she entered. She set down the dessert plate. She turned to retrieve the empty glasses from the far end of the table. "Have you eaten today?" The voice was quiet, not loud, not commanding, just present. The kind of voice that didn't need to raise itself to be heard. Lena turned around. Damien Valenti was looking at her, not at her uniform, not at the tray. At her. "I'm fine," she said. The words came out thinner than she intended, like paper held up to a window. His expression didn't change. He looked at her the way a man looks at something that doesn't quite match the information he's been given. That's not what I asked. I understand. She picked up the empty glasses. Is there anything else I can get you, sir? Sit down. I'm sorry. You're about to fall over, he said. Not unkindly, not as an accusation, just as a fact stated with the same directness he probably used to state every fact. Sit down before that happens. Lena opened her mouth to tell him that she was perfectly fine, that she had been doing this for 11 months, and had never once sat down in a private dining room with a guest that Gerald would almost certainly fire her on the spot. If she did that, she didn't need. The room tilted. It wasn't a dramatic thing. It was quiet, almost gentle, the way the ground shifts in the first second of an earthquake, before you understand what's happening. The tray in her hand suddenly weighed 40 pounds. The overhead light stretched sideways. The carpet rose up toward her in a soft, unhurried way, and she thought with strange clarity. The glasses. Don't drop the glasses. The glasses cost more than your whole shift is worth. She didn't drop the glasses, because Damien Valenti was out of his chair before the tray tilted more than 15 degrees, and his hand was around her wrist, and then his arm was around her shoulders, and the tray was taken from her hands with a precision that suggested he had caught falling things before, and she was guided carefully, firmly, without hesitation into the chair he had just vacated. The glasses were set on the table unbroken. Lena sat in Damien Valenti's chair and stared at the wall and tried to remember how breathing worked. Don't apologize, he said before she could open her mouth. She closed it. He pulled out his phone. Do you have allergies? What? Food allergies. No, but I don't. Are you diabetic? Any condition I should know about before I order food for you? She looked at him. He was standing at the end of the table with his phone in his hand and his full attention directed at her, and he looked completely unsurprised by the turn the evening had taken. Like this was a problem that had appeared and was now being solved. Like there was nothing unusual about the most feared man in Chicago ordering food for a waitress who had nearly passed out in his private dining room. You don't have to do that, Lena said. I know. He ordered anyway. He spoke briefly into the phone, not to the kitchen, she realized, but to someone outside. Someone who apparently had access to food at 9:30 on a Friday night, because a plate arrived 12 minutes later, carried in by one of the men who had been sitting at the table earlier. Real food. Not restaurant food. The kind of food that came from an actual kitchen, rice, roasted chicken, vegetables that hadn't been arranged decoratively. Damien set it in front of her. Lena looked at the plate, then at him, then at the plate again. Eat, he said. This is... She stopped. Started again. This is very unusual. Yes. I work here. I'm not supposed to... You were about to collapse in front of me. I prefer the alternative. He sat down across from her, not at the head of the table, but at the side in the nearest available chair, like a man settling in to wait. Eat the food, and then tell me what's happening. Something in the direct simplicity of the instruction broke through the wall of professional composure she had been maintaining for 11 months. She picked up the fork. She put food in her mouth. And for a moment, she just sat there in Damien Valenti's private dining room, eating chicken and rice, while the most dangerous man in Chicago watched her with an expression she couldn't identify, but that contained unmistakably something that looked like recognition. Like he had seen exhaustion this total before, and knew what it meant. She ate half the plate before she realized she was crying. Not the dramatic kind of crying. The quiet kind. The kind where your eyes simply fill up and overflow because they've been holding too much for too long, and the dam gives way without warning. She set down the fork and pressed her fingers against her eyes, and felt the specific humiliation of crying in front of a stranger who happened to run half the city's criminal operations. I'm sorry, she said. I'm sorry I don't do this. I'm not... Stop apologizing. It's been a long day. How long? She lowered her hands, looked at him. Does it matter? It matters to me. She didn't know why she told him. Maybe because she was tired of holding everything by herself. Maybe because something in the directness of his attention made evasion feel like too much work. Maybe just because he asked, and in 11 months of 3-job days and 4-hour nights, almost nobody had asked. "I've been up since 5, she said. "This is my 3rd job today. My brother has a medical appointment on Thursday that costs $340, and I have $260. And before I could take my break tonight, they moved me to your room and I—" She stopped. "I hadn't eaten since noon. That's all. I'm fine. I'm always fine." Damien Valenti was quiet for a moment. Then, "What's your brother's condition?" She blinked. "Why? Because you're running 3 jobs and sleeping 4 hours a night to pay for his treatment, and I want to understand what I'm looking at." "You're looking at someone who made a professional error," Lena said carefully. "I shouldn't have let this happen. I'll go back to—" "You'll sit there until you've finished eating," he said. Not harsh, just absolute. "And then you'll tell me your brother's name." Something shifted in Lena's chest. Something that felt dangerous. The way warmth feels dangerous when you've been cold for a very long time, and your body doesn't fully trust it yet. "Why?" she asked again. Damien looked at her steadily. "I'll tell you when I know more." She picked up her fork. She finished the plate. And when she finally set it down, she felt for the first time in longer than she could remember, like her body was actually attached to the ground beneath her. She reached up to straighten her uniform, a reflexive professional gesture, the kind of motion she made 50 times a night, and her hand caught on the inner lining of her jacket. The envelope was there. She had forgotten about it. She had sewn it into the lining 4 days ago when she realized she couldn't trust her apartment. She hadn't known what else to do with it. She had just put it there and gone back to surviving and tried not to think about what the contents meant or who would come looking for them. Her hand stilled. Across the table, Damien watched the change in her expression, the way a man watches a weather system shift. "What is it?" he asked. "Nothing." She smoothed her jacket. "Nothing, your face just did something," he said. "I don't know what you mean." "You remembered something. Something that frightened you." He leaned forward slightly. "What is it?" Lena looked at him, at the steady dark eyes, at the face that had heard every kind of lie and developed some kind of internal instrument for detecting them. She thought about the envelope, about the figures in it, about the name written at the top in careful, damning letters. She thought about the man who had given it to her. His voice on the phone 3 days later changed tighter with an undercurrent of something that had turned her stomach. "Lena, I need that back. I need you to understand that I need that back, and that this is not a conversation you want to have with me again." She thought about the way she had checked her locks that night, and the next night, and every night since. "I should go," she said. "I need to clock out. Gerald will." "Gerald works for the restaurant," Damien said. "The restaurant operates in a building that I own." He said it without emphasis, as a simple correction of her information. "You're not going to be penalized for this." She stood up anyway, her legs held, which felt like a minor miracle. "Thank you for the food. That was very kind. I'm sorry for the disruption." She was at the door when his voice reached her. "The person who frightened you," he said. "The one you remembered just now." She stopped, her hand on the door handle. "Whatever they told you about what happens if you talk, they're wrong." A pause. "I tend to have more resources than the people who make those kinds of threats." Lena stood at the door for a long moment, then she walked out. She made it through the service corridor, through the kitchen, into the staff bathroom. She ran cold water over her wrists, the way she had done every night for the last 11 months, and she looked at herself in the mirror, and she said very quietly, "Don't be stupid. Don't be stupid. Don't be stupid." She had met a lot of powerful men in her life, the kind of power that announces itself, the kind that expects gratitude and extracts payment for its generosity. But Damien Valenti hadn't asked for anything, and that frightened her more than anything else, because in her experience, the men who didn't ask up front were the ones who collected the debt later. She dried her hands. She got her coat from her locker. She reached into the inner lining and felt the envelope still there, still intact. She pushed through the back door into the cold Chicago night. She made it exactly 11 steps before the man stepped out of the shadow near the dumpsters. She had seen him before. Once outside Marcus's hospital. Once in the parking lot of the diner. She had told herself it was coincidence. She stopped walking. He didn't say anything. He just stood there in the specific way that men stand when they want you to understand that you are being watched. That there is nowhere you can go that isn't observed. That the walls you thought were protecting you are actually just walls someone else chose not to climb yet. Lena's heart hammered against the inside of her ribs. She made herself walk. She made herself move forward with even steps. And she did not look back, and she did not run, and she did not allow herself to feel any of the terror that was flooding every nerve in her body. She got to the bus stop. She waited 4 minutes for the 22. She got on and sat by the window and watched the city move past in long yellow streaks and thought about the envelope. About Marcus. About the appointment on Thursday. About the man in the shadow near the dumpsters and what it meant that he had been standing there. She thought about Damien Valenti's voice. Whatever they told you about what happens if you talk, they're wrong. She pulled the envelope out of her lining. She held it in her lap with both hands. And she thought about how wrong everything had gone from the moment she picked up a forgotten folder from a table at a private event. 6 weeks ago, a folder that wasn't hers, that she had tried to return, that the man had taken back from her with shaking hands and a face the color of old chalk. She thought about the copy she had made, the one she was holding right now. Inside the envelope was a single sheet of paper. Numbers, account transfers, dates, and at the top, a name, Victor Romano. She didn't know who Victor Romano was, but whoever he was stealing from someone. And whoever that someone was, they were the kind of people who sent men to stand in shadows outside restaurant service entrances. She folded the envelope. She put it back inside her jacket. And she thought about Thursday and Marcus and $80 more, and how much a single decision could cost a person. Outside the bus window, Chicago moved through the night without her, and in a private dining room at Bellecourt, Damien Valenti was already on his phone, not calling his driver, not arranging his next meeting, but speaking to the man who tracked every threat operating in his city, asking a single question. Who's watching the Waitress? The answer came back in 4 minutes. 4 minutes was fast, even by Damien's standards. His man on surveillance, a quiet, meticulous former detective named Reese, who had worked for Damien for 9 years and had never once delivered incomplete information, called back, while Damien was still sitting at the table in the private dining room, the empty dessert plate still in front of the chair where Lena Carter had been sitting 20 minutes ago. 3 separate sightings in the last 2 weeks, Reese said. Hospital on North Michigan, diner off Clark. Tonight service exit of Bellecourt. Same guy each time. We ID'd him an hour ago. He's freelance, picks up contract work from whoever's paying. Last known employer was a security firm that operates as a front out of the West Loop. Damien was quiet. The security firm, he said. Who owns it? A pause on the line that lasted exactly 1 second too long. The registration runs through 3 shell companies, but the 4th layer traces back to Romano Consolidated. Damien set his phone face down on the table. He sat there for a moment, in the particular stillness that came over him, when something he hadn't expected turned out to be something he should have seen coming. It wasn't surprise exactly. It was closer to the feeling of pressing on a bruise you didn't know you had. Victor Romano. Victor, who had been sitting at this same table 2 hours ago. Victor, who had spent 14 years earning a seat at every table Damien occupied. Victor, who knew Damien's operations better than almost anyone alive. Victor, who was apparently having a waitress followed. Damien picked up his phone and made a second call, this one to his driver. Find the woman who just left the service exit. Don't approach her. Don't speak to her. Just make sure she gets home. And if she doesn't, then you call me. He ended the call. He stood up. He straightened his jacket with the automatic precision of a man who had long ago learned that composure was not a feeling, but a discipline. And he walked out of the private dining room and through the restaurant and into the cold Chicago night. And he thought about an envelope sewn into the lining of a waitress's uniform jacket, and what it meant that she had hidden it there instead of in her apartment, and what it meant that she had hidden it at all. She knew something. And someone connected to his organization had decided she was a problem, which made her his problem now whether she knew it or not. Lena Carter lived in a fourth-floor walk-up in Pilsen. Damien knew this by 11 o'clock because Reese was thorough, and because the bus she had taken ran a route that left limited options. His driver confirmed she had made it inside safely. The man from the service exit had followed the bus 3 stops before turning off, which meant the surveillance was passive for now, observation, not action. For now. Damien made 3 more calls on the drive home, and then sat in silence for the rest of the ride, looking out the window at a city that he had spent 20 years learning to read like a language, and thinking about the specific kind of courage it took to sew a document into your jacket lining, and then show up to work and carry plates for people who didn't know your name. He had known a lot of frightened people in his life. Most of them showed it. Lena Carter had been terrified in that dining room. He had read it in the tension across her shoulders, in the way her eyes cataloged exits, in the controlled evenness of her voice when she was working hardest to sound unafraid. But she had walked out into the night anyway, and she had gotten on the bus anyway, and she had done all of it alone. That was not nothing. He arrived home at 11:43. He went to his study. He pulled up everything Reese had sent him in the last hour. Lena Marie Carter, 29 years old, born in Gary, Indiana. 1 younger brother, Marcus, 24, currently enrolled in a clinical treatment program at Northwestern Memorial for a degenerative joint condition that was manageable but expensive. Father deceased cardiac event 3 years ago. Mother estranged. No romantic partner of record. No close associates outside of a small network of coworkers. 3 jobs. No car. An apartment that cost $850 a month, which was cheap for Pilsen, but represented roughly 30% of what she was pulling in across all 3 positions, assuming the tips at Bellecourt were consistent, which they were according to the employment records Reese had accessed. Lena Carter was one of Bellecourt's most consistent earners in the tip column, which meant she was excellent at the job, which meant the near collapse tonight was not performance failure. It was a body that had simply run out of runway. Damien read through all of it. He read it the way he read everything, not looking for what was there, but looking for what was missing. What was missing was the 6-week gap. Lena's work history was consistent up until 6 weeks ago, when her shifts at Bellecourt showed 3 consecutive nights where she had left early. No documentation of why. The diner records showed she had taken a sick day, her first in 8 months. And then 2 days after that, her apartment building's key fob records showed she had been in the building's lobby at 1:17 in the morning, which meant she had come home from somewhere after midnight on a Tuesday. 6 weeks ago. The same time frame as the surveillance. He pulled up his calendar and cross-referenced it against his own records, and there it was. 6 weeks ago, he had hosted a private event at a venue in River North. Industry people, mostly legitimate. A fundraiser he had attended as a courtesy to a political contact. He had been there for 45 minutes and left. The catering had been handled by an outside company. He searched the company name, found the contract, found the staff assignments, and there on the list of server staff for the evening, L. Carter. Damien leaned back in his chair. So, she had been there. At the event. In the same room where a substantial amount of people connected to his world had been moving and talking and conducting the kind of side business that happened at that type of gathering. And she had picked up something she wasn't supposed to see, because people in service positions were invisible to powerful men, and powerful men were consequently careless around them. She had picked up something that Victor Romano had subsequently decided to recover. The question was, what exactly? He thought about the envelope, about the way her hand had gone to her lining, not consciously, not deliberately, but the way your hand goes to a wound you're trying to protect without drawing attention to it. He picked up his phone. Reese. The Romano Consolidated Shell Network, how deep does it go? Still mapping it. What I can tell you right now is there are accounts we've never seen before, moving money in patterns that don't match anything in our current ledger. From where? That's what I'm working on. Give me until morning. You have until 6. He put the phone down. He sat in the quiet of his study for a long time, thinking about a woman who worked 3 jobs and hid evidence in her jacket lining, and apologized for passing out in front of the most dangerous man in the room. He thought about what she had said. "I'm always fine," and the specific, recognizable exhaustion in her voice when she said it. The exhaustion of someone who has said that sentence so many times that it stopped meaning anything years ago and became just a sound they made to keep other people from asking follow-up questions. He understood that particular exhaustion better than he would have liked. At 6:14 the next morning, Reese called. "You need to see this," he said. "I'm sending it now." The document that arrived in Damien's secure inbox was 12 pages long. He read it standing up still in the clothes he'd worn the night before, and by page 4, his jaw was set, and by page 9, he had the particular feeling he got when something he had believed to be solid turned out to be constructed on sand. Victor Romano had been running a secondary operation inside Damien's financial network for at least 2 years. Not a large one, not at first. Skimming at the margins, rerouting small amounts through legitimate business accounts, the kind of movement that looked like rounding errors when you weren't looking for it. But it had grown. It had been growing, steadily expanding to cover larger sums, reaching into contracts that Damien oversaw personally. The total, as best as Reese could currently estimate, was somewhere between $4 and $6 million. And at the top of the primary documentation, the original accounting sheet that Reese had found buried in a third-tier server backup, was a reference number that matched the format of a document Damien's organization used internally for only one category of transaction. The kind that left no paper trail by design. The kind that Victor had access to specifically because Damien trusted him. Damien put down the documents. He picked up a different phone, a secondary line untraceable. He called a number he rarely used. When the man on the other end picked up, Damien said 3 sentences and ended the call. Then he called Reese back. "I need to speak to the Carter woman, today. Can you get me a location where I can do that without creating a scene?" "She has a shift at the diner at 7, off at 10. After 10 then. She goes to the hospital to see her brother at 11 on Saturdays." Damien was quiet for a moment. "Then I'll meet her at the hospital." A pause. "That's going to frighten her." "Yes," he said. "I know." Lena had been awake since 5:30. Not because her alarm went off at 5:30. It went off at 5:45, but because she had not slept more than 2 consecutive hours since the man outside the dumpsters. She had lain in her bed in the dark and listened to the sounds of the building, and thought about the envelope, and thought about Marcus, and thought about the things that could happen to a person who knew something they weren't supposed to know, and didn't have anyone capable of protecting them. She had run through her options approximately 40 times during the night, the way you do when you can't sleep, and your mind starts circling without being able to land anywhere. She could go to the police. But the names in that document were the kind of names that had relationships with police departments, and she had no way of knowing whose side anyone would be on. She could destroy the document. But she had already destroyed the original. The copy in her jacket was the only record she had, and destroying it felt like giving up the only leverage she possessed, even though she hadn't figured out how to use it. She could go to a journalist. She had actually looked up investigative journalists at the Tribune, at 2 in the morning, reading their bylines with her phone screen turned down to minimum brightness, before the sheer scale of what she was trying to do had caught up with her, and she had put the phone face down on the mattress and stared at the ceiling, and thought about the fact that Marcus had an appointment on Thursday. She needed to survive until Thursday. She needed to get through the diner shift and get to the hospital and see her brother. And then she needed to figure out what she was going to do about the piece of paper that was currently sitting inside her jacket lining like a live wire. She got to the diner at 6:58. She worked the breakfast rush. She poured coffee and took orders and carried plates and smiled at things that weren't funny and nodded at things that didn't require a response. And somewhere in the mechanical rhythm of all of it, she found the particular numbness that had been her most reliable coping mechanism for the last year. You didn't have to feel anything if you were moving fast enough. You didn't have to think if your hands were busy. By 10 o'clock, when the rush had cleared and the diner had settled into the quiet lull of mid-morning, she was almost okay. She got to Northwestern Memorial at 11:08. Marcus was awake, which was good. His color was better than last week, which was also good. He had been moved to a room with a window, which he had strong opinions about, specifically that the view was a parking garage, and he had been cheated. She laughed at that, genuinely the first real laugh in several days, and sat on the edge of his bed and listened to him describe in extensive detail the political dynamics of his hospital floor, which apparently involved a nurse named Beckett, who ran the unit with a kind of benevolent authoritarianism that Marcus respected while simultaneously complaining about constantly. "You look terrible," he told her midway through this description. "Thank you." "I mean it, Lena. When did you last sleep?" "I sleep." "You sleep like a hummingbird, like 30-second intervals." "I'm fine." He gave her the look he had been giving her since he was 12 years old, the look that said he knew exactly what she was doing and was choosing for now not to push it. "The appointment's Thursday." "I know. I told you I can ask Dr. Reyes about a payment plan. They have programs for Marcus. I'm just saying, I have it handled." She said it firmly, calmly, with the specific tone that meant this conversation is over, and Marcus heard it the way he always heard it, and let out a long breath through his nose and looked at the ceiling. "I hate when you do that," he said. "I know. You've been doing it since Dad got sick. You just close the door and handle everything by yourself and never let anyone—" "Marcus." "Fine." He looked back at her. "Fine. But you look terrible. And I'm allowed to say that because I'm your brother and I'm in a hospital bed, which means I win all arguments by default." She squeezed his hand. She sat with him for another 40 minutes and talked about nothing consequential, a show. He was watching a book she had been meaning to read for 2 years, The Specific Injustice of Hospital Food, and for those 40 minutes she managed to be just his sister, just a person sitting with someone she loved without the weight of everything else pressing down on her chest. Then she walked out into the hallway, and Damien Valenti was standing by the elevator. She stopped. Her heart did something complicated and immediate in her chest. He was wearing a dark coat, no tie, his hands in his pockets, watching her approach with the unhurried expression of a man who had arrived with time to spare. He looked completely out of context in the fluorescent plainness of a hospital hallway, like something from a different world that had stepped through the wrong door. "How?" she said instead of hello. "I have resources." "That's not an answer. I needed to speak with you somewhere private," he said, "and I didn't want to frighten you by appearing at your apartment. And appearing at my brother's hospital is less frightening. I considered it the lesser of two options." He gestured toward a small seating area at the end of the hallway, away from the nurse's station, with 2 chairs and a window overlooking the parking garage Marcus had complained about. "5 minutes. That's all I need." Lena looked at him. She looked at the seating area. She thought about the man by the dumpsters and the 11 steps she had made it before he appeared, and the 40 minutes on the bus she had spent staring at the city. She walked to the seating area and sat down. Damien sat across from her. He didn't have his phone out. He wasn't looking around. He was simply looking at her with the full, undivided focus of a man who had decided that this conversation was what mattered right now. "The man who was watching you last night," he said. "He works for a firm that traces back to someone in my organization." The room felt suddenly smaller. "What does that mean?" "It means the document you have, and I am assuming you have a document based on everything about your behavior last night, is connected to my world. And whoever you took it from is now trying to recover it." "I didn't take anything," Lena said carefully. "I found something that was left behind." "I believe you." The directness of it caught her off guard. She had prepared herself for skepticism, for negotiation, for the particular brand of powerful man condescension that always arrived with the assumption that she needed to be convinced before she could be useful. "Why? Because the alternative is that you're operating some kind of complicated scheme involving 3 jobs and 4 hours of sleep a night, and that doesn't make sense." He leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees. "I need to know what's in the document, Lena." She noticed he used her name. Not her last name, not Miss, not the generic anonymity of you. Her name like a person uses when they're speaking to another person, and not to a problem they're trying to manage. "And if I tell you," she said, "what happens?" "That depends on what it says." "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed. It's not. He was quiet for a moment. What I can tell you is that the man having you watched is not going to stop. Passive surveillance becomes active intervention at some point, and the timeline for that is not in your favor. You have a brother in this hospital, and a schedule that leaves you alone in public at predictable times, and that combination. He stopped. I don't want to frighten you more than you already are, but I need you to understand that right now you're navigating something that requires more than a locked apartment door and a hidden jacket lining. Lena's hands were folded in her lap. She looked down at them. She thought about the conversation she'd had with herself on the bus. Don't be stupid. Don't be stupid. Don't be stupid. The name at the top of the document, she said quietly, is Victor Romano. The quality of the silence that followed was different from any silence she had heard from him yet. She looked up. His expression had not changed, but something behind his eyes had moved, a deep tectonic shift that he was controlling with everything he had, and was almost entirely controlling, except that she had been watching people's faces her entire working life, and she knew the difference between a man who was unmoved and a man who was working extremely hard to appear unmoved. Tell me exactly where you found it, he said. His voice was completely level. On event, 6 weeks ago, River North venue, I was on catering staff. There was a man at the bar toward the end of the night. He had a folder. He stepped away for a few minutes and left it at the bar, and I thought it was something that had been forgotten, so I picked it up. He came back and got it from me, but one page had already slipped out and... She stopped. I should have put it back. I know I should have put it back. But the numbers on it, they were being moved in a pattern that I recognized because my father used to... She stopped again. Started over. My father was an accountant before he got sick. He used to bring work home. I grew up reading financial documents the same way other kids read comic books. And the pattern in that document was a specific kind of pattern that you only use when you're moving money in a way you don't want traced. She met his eyes. So I made a copy before I put the page back. Damien was very still. And then 3 days later this man called me. Romano called you. I didn't know his name then. He said he was calling on behalf of someone who had been at the event. He said I had taken something. I told him I had returned everything. He said... She kept her voice level because she had replayed this part of the conversation so many times it had worn smooth like a stone in a river. He said I needed to understand the kind of people involved and what happened to people who didn't exercise good judgment. A pause. He knew my brother's name. He knew which hospital. He knew the treatment schedule. Damien's jaw had tightened. Not dramatically, just enough. After that I started noticing the man. Outside the hospital. Outside the diner. I couldn't go to the police because I don't know who can be trusted, and I couldn't go anywhere else because I don't know. She exhaled slowly. I don't have anyone to go to. She said it without self-pity. Just as a fact, the way she stated most facts about her own life cleanly without ornamentation, because ornamentation cost energy she didn't have. You have the document with you now, Damien said. Yes. I need to see it. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about every reason not to. About trust and power, and the way that giving someone information was the same as giving them leverage. About the fact that she didn't know this man, not really, no matter what the previous 12 hours had felt like. And then she thought about Thursday. About Marcus. About the man who was going to stop being passive at some point on a timeline that was not in her favor. She reached inside her jacket. She put the envelope on the seat between them. Damien picked it up. He unfolded it. He read it in the way she had described reading financial documents, not like someone encountering information, but like someone confirming something they had been tracking from a distance. His eyes moved across the page with a precision that matched her father's, and she felt an unexpected lurch of recognition at that, a strange and specific grief, and pushed it down. He finished reading. He folded the document. He held it in his hands and looked at the parking garage through the window for a long moment. And in that moment, Lena had the impression of watching a man who had just had the ground shift under his feet, choosing very deliberately not to fall. Victor Romano has been with me for 14 years, he said. I'm sorry. He looked at her. Something flickered across his face, not the emotion, but the outline of it. You're apologizing to me. It seems like something that would be difficult to hear. Most things worth knowing are difficult to hear. He looked back at the document in his hands. This is the only copy. She hesitated 1 second too long. His eyes came back to hers immediately. There's another copy. There's a digital version, she said. Encrypted. On a cloud account that doesn't connect to my name. I made it the night after he called me. I'm not trying to use it as leverage. I just needed to know that if something happened to me, the information would still... She stopped. It was the only thing I could think of. Damien was quiet for a moment, and then, surprising her completely, he said, "That was smart." She blinked. "Don't delete it," he said. "Not yet. Keep the access information somewhere secure that isn't on your person." He handed the physical copy back to her. "Keep this too." She looked at it in her hands. "You don't want it." "I've read it. I know what I need to know." His eyes were steady. "But you keeping it means you have something. And right now, I want you to have something." Lena folded the envelope, put it back in her jacket. Her hands were steadier than she expected. "What happens now?" she asked. "I need 48 hours, Damien said. "During that time, you don't go anywhere alone if you can avoid it. If you have to go somewhere alone, you call this number." He put a card on the seat where the envelope had been, and tell them where you're going and when you expect to arrive. If you don't arrive within 15 minutes of that estimate, people will come looking. He paused. "Your brother's appointment on Thursday, the $340. She stiffened. "I didn't tell you that as a..." "It's handled," he said. "Don't argue with me about it. You can be angry about it after Thursday." "I'm angry about it now." "I know." And something in his voice, very slight, almost completely hidden, suggested that this was actually not unwelcome information. That he preferred her angry to defeated. "Keep the number. Stay careful." He stood. "That's it," she said. "For now. You're going to go confront your trusted advisor of 14 years, based on 1 page of financial documents and the word of a waitress who nearly passed out in your dining room." He looked down at her. "I'm not going to confront him yet. I'm going to know everything there is to know first." A pause. "And for the record, the word of someone who documented evidence at personal risk and then maintained composure under active threat. For 6 weeks carries more weight than you're apparently giving yourself credit for." He walked to the elevator. Lena sat in the chair with the card in her hand and watched him go. She turned the card over. No name, no title, just a phone number in clean printed digits. She tucked it into her pocket. She sat there for another minute, listening to the sounds of the hospital around her. The intercom calls the wheel of a cart somewhere, a door closing the ordinary machinery of a place that dealt with crisis every hour and somehow kept moving. And she thought about the fact that she had just handed the most dangerous man in Chicago a document that could destroy someone inside his own organization. She thought about Marcus laughing about the parking garage view. She thought about Thursday. She thought about Damien Valenti saying that was smart with the tone of someone who did not give out that particular assessment lightly, and the way it had landed somewhere in her chest and sat there warm and unexpected, like something she hadn't been prepared to receive. She got up. She walked back down the hall to her brother's room. Marcus looked up when she came in. "You were gone a long time." "I ran into someone." "Who?" She sat back down on the edge of his bed. She picked up the book on his nightstand and looked at the cover without reading it. "Someone who might be able to help," she said. Marcus studied her face with the particular attention of a younger sibling who had spent a lifetime reading between his sister's lines. "Are you okay?" She put the book down. She looked at her brother at the window he'd complained about, at the thin hospital blanket at his face that still looked too young to be in a place like this, and would always look too young to her, regardless of what either of them were dealing with. "I think so," she said. And for the first time in 6 weeks, she almost believed it. In the elevator going down. Damien stood alone and looked at the floor indicator climbing down from 4 and thought about 14 years. About a man who had sat at his table and eaten his food and traveled in his car and attended the funerals of people Damien had cared about, while simultaneously building an exit strategy funded by money stolen from the organization that had protected him. I thought about the face of a woman who had encoded financial irregularities from memory because her father had been an accountant. He thought about what it meant that Victor Romano had sent someone to watch her rather than retrieve the document immediately, which meant either he hadn't known she had copied it, or he had known and was waiting for her to lead him to something larger. The elevator doors opened. Damien walked through the hospital lobby and out into the cold morning air and got into the car where his driver was waiting, and he said nothing for the first 2 blocks, and then he said, "Get me everything we have on Romano's movements over the last 60 days. Every meeting, every call on the secondary line, every dinner." He looked out the window. "And I want a team watching the Carter apartment starting tonight. Quiet, rotating. She doesn't see them." "Understood. And find out who else Victor has been talking to outside the organization." Damien's voice was completely level. Because a man who steals for 2 years and then sends surveillance rather than a cleanup crew is a man who thinks he still has options. I want to know what options he thinks he has. The car moved through the Saturday morning streets and behind the glass. Damien Valenti watched. He had spent 20 years learning to control and understood that the woman he had left sitting in a hospital hallway holding a phone number had just handed him the thread that when he pulled it was going to unravel something he had not yet fully measured. The question was, how much of his world was going to come apart when it did? The 48 hours Damien had asked for lasted 31. Reese called at 2 in the morning on Monday, with a voice that had dropped to the register he used when the information was serious enough to require a certain kind of care in the delivery. "You need to come in," he said. Not over the phone. Damien was already awake. He had been awake for most of the previous 2 nights working through a process that looked from the outside like patience, but was actually something closer to the controlled detonation of everything he had believed to be true about the last 14 years. He had reviewed transaction records. He had cross-referenced meeting logs. He had pulled phone records from the secondary line Reese had flagged, and he had read them with the specific quality of attention that he normally reserved for situations where the cost of missing something was irreversible. He had missed nothing. That was the part that kept returning to him in the quiet of those 2 nights, not the betrayal itself, which was in the brutal arithmetic of the world he operated in not entirely without precedent. Men stole. Men built parallel loyalties. Men calculated exits when they decided the current arrangement had reached its ceiling. These were facts of his world as established as gravity. What kept returning was how long it had been happening without him seeing it. 2 years. Possibly longer if the early-stage groundwork was included. Victor had been moving money through structures that Damien himself had designed, using access that Damien had personally granted, exploiting the specific blind spot that trust creates in even the most careful person. The blind spot that says, "I already know this one, I don't need to look again." Damien arrived at Reese's location, a secure office above a legitimate property management firm in the South Loop, at 2:45 in the morning. Reese was at his desk with 4 monitors running and the kind of focused caffeine-sustained alertness of a man who had been working without stopping for the better part of 2 days. "Tell me," Damien said. Reese pulled up the primary monitor. "The financial operation is bigger than the initial estimate. We're looking at closer to 8 million, not 4 to 6. He's been moving it in 3-month cycles, skimming just below the threshold where our internal auditing process would flag anomalies. Whoever helped him structure it knew our protocols from the inside." "He structured it himself," Damien said. "He sat in on every audit redesign we've done in the last decade." "That's what I figured." Reese clicked to the next screen. "But here's what I called you in for. The money isn't just sitting somewhere. It's been moved into an operating account for a separate entity. A real one, legitimate registration, real employees, real contracts. He's been building something." "What kind of something?" "Import logistics. On the surface, legitimate freight. But the contract network underneath it runs through 3 organizations that we've had prior intelligence on. He's not just stealing from you, Damien. He's been building a competing operation, using your money, using your infrastructure, using contacts he made through you." The room was very quiet. "How close is it to operational?" Damien asked. "Based on what I'm seeing, weeks. maybe less. Damien stood with his hands in his pockets and looked at the monitors and thought about Victor Romano sitting across from him at the Bellacourt table on Friday night, laughing at something one of the other men had said, completely at ease, occupying the space of trusted colleague with the fluency of someone who had been practicing the performance for 2 years. "There's one more thing," Reese said. He said it in a way that meant this was the part he had been working up to, the surveillance on the Carter woman. It wasn't just observation. Damien turned to look at him. "I pulled the communication logs from the freelancer who was running it. He received a secondary instruction set 3 days ago. The passive surveillance was always meant to transition." Reese met his eyes. They were going to take the brother. The temperature in the room didn't change, but something in Damien's expression did a shift so contained and so total that Reese, who had worked for this man for 9 years and had seen him receive catastrophic information without flinching, instinctively leaned back slightly in his chair. "When?" Damien said. One word, completely flat. The instruction was flagged for execution this week, no specific day, but the logic was, take the brother, use him to get the document back, and then... Reese stopped. "And then," Damien repeated. "And then both of them become a loose end problem." Damien took out his phone. He dialed the number of the team lead he had assigned to Lena's building. It rang twice. "Status. Quiet night. She's been in since 9. No movement, no visitors, no vehicles that don't belong. I need a second team at Northwestern Memorial, room 417, starting now. Nobody goes in or out of that room without my knowledge. Nobody." A pause. "And if anyone approaches the patient, you stop them. However that needs to happen." He ended the call. He looked at Reese. "Victor's location. His apartment on the Gold Coast. He got home at midnight. He hasn't left. Keep watching him. If he moves, I want to know before his second foot is out the door." Damien buttoned his jacket. "And Reese, when I move on this, I need everything documented. Every transaction, every communication, every layer of that operation. Ironclad. Not because I need it for myself." He paused. "Because when this is over, there needs to be a record that this came from inside, and that I ended it." Reese nodded slowly. "How long are you going to wait? Long enough to know everything, not long enough to let him act first." Damien walked to the door. "Get me a full network map by 6. Everyone connected to his operation. Every name, every contract, everyone who knew and said nothing." He walked out into the 2 a.m. city and sat in his car and called a third number one he had been thinking about since he read Reese's first report, a number that represented a choice he hadn't made yet about how this was going to end. He held the phone without dialing. Then he put it back in his pocket. Not yet. Lena found out about Marcus at 7:13 Monday morning. She was between the diner and her next commitment, standing on a corner, waiting for the light to change with a coffee she had paid for with the last of her singles when her phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but she answered it the way she answered all unfamiliar numbers, now with the specific bracing quality of someone who has learned that unknown callers rarely bring good news. "Ms. Carter." The voice was professional calm. "My name is Daniel. I work for Damien Valenti. I'm calling to let you know that there are additional personnel at your brother's floor this morning and that your brother is safe." The coffee cup crumpled slightly in her hand. "Why does my brother need—" "We intercepted communications indicating an action was being planned for this week. Mr. Valenti moved preventively last night. Marcus Carter is safe. He doesn't know about the security presence. They're positioned as general floor staff." The light changed. Lena didn't move. The pedestrians around her flowed past like water around a stone. "What kind of action?" she said. Her voice was completely steady, which was extraordinary, given that her entire ribcage felt like it was contracting. "The people who have been watching you were planning to use your brother as leverage to recover the document. Mr. Valenti stopped that from happening." A brief pause. "He'd like to speak with you this morning if you're available. Somewhere you feel comfortable. Your choice of location." The light cycled back to red. Lena stood on the corner and thought about all the nights she had checked her locks and thought she was protecting Marcus by keeping the secret to herself, by carrying it alone, by not telling anyone because telling anyone meant involving them, and involving them meant putting them in the same position she was in, and she had worked so hard for so long to make sure that Marcus never had to be in the position she was in. She had been protecting him from the outside, while the threat was already planning to walk through the door. "Tell him I'll be there," she said. "Send me the address." The place Damien chose was not his office and not a restaurant. It was a small conference room in the property management firm in the South Loop Plain, neutral, the kind of space that didn't announce anything about power. Lena noticed that detail when she walked in, and she filed it alongside the other details she had been quietly filing since Friday night. I was already there when she arrived. Jacket on, coffee on the table, 2 cups, which meant he had known she would want one, which meant he had been paying the kind of attention to small details that either indicated genuine consideration or very sophisticated strategy, and she still hadn't determined which it was. "You knew about Marcus last night," she said before she sat down. "You moved people there without calling me." "Yes." "Why didn't you call me?" "Because it was 2 in the morning, and I needed to move quickly, and I didn't want to frighten you with information that I could act on faster than you could process it." He paused. "I should have called you anyway. I made a decision for you without your input, and that was wrong. I'm telling you that directly." She sat down. She picked up the coffee. The directness of the apology, no qualification, no "but in my defense," landed somewhere unexpected. "Tell me everything," she said. He told her. He walked her through what Reese had found: the full scope of the financial operation, the competing logistics company, the network of people involved, the instruction set sent to the surveillance operative 3 days ago. He told her about the timeline. He told her what loose end problem meant without using that phrase, because she was intelligent enough to understand the implications stated clearly, and he respected her enough not to dress it up. Lena listened to all of it without interrupting. She held her coffee with both hands and kept her face still and listened. And when he finished, she sat with the information for a moment before she said anything. "He was going to take Marcus," she said. Not a question. Just saying it out loud, making it real the way you have to make terrible things real before you can figure out what to do with them. "Yes." And then, "Yes." She set down the coffee. She looked at her hands. She thought about Marcus's face when she had left him on Saturday, the way he had watched her go with the expression he wore when he was worried about her and was pretending not to be. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I'm going to dismantle his operation and remove him from my organization," Damien said. "Every account, every contact, every contract he built with money that wasn't his. All of it." He looked at her steadily. "I want to be clear with you about something. The way I would have handled this 2 years ago, the way my world expects me to handle this, is different from what I'm planning." She looked up. "Different how? Victor Romano is going to answer for what he's done, but I'm not going to make him disappear. I'm going to make sure there's a documented, provable record of every illegal thing he built, and I'm going to hand that record to the right people." He paused. "It's more complicated than the alternative. It takes longer. It exposes more of my operations to scrutiny than I'm entirely comfortable with." "Then why?" Lena said. He looked at her for a moment before answering, and something in the quality of that moment felt like the question was harder than it appeared on the surface. "Because I've spent a long time doing things the other way," he said. "And I'm tired of the other way." The honesty of it settled in the room like something with physical weight. "You don't trust the police," Lena said. "I know which investigators I can trust and which ones are bought. It's a shorter list than most people would like." He looked at her. "Your copy of the document, I need the digital version as well, not to control it, to verify the chain of evidence. Your name doesn't have to be attached to it in any way that's public. And if I say no, then I work with what I have." He said it without hesitation. "You're not obligated to me. You haven't been obligated since I caught you Friday night. Everything since then has been your choice, and I want it to stay that way." Lena looked at him for a long time. She thought about the card in her pocket, about the fact that a team of people she had never met had been standing outside her brother's hospital room since 2 in the morning because this man had made a phone call, about the fact that he had told her directly that he had made a wrong decision and hadn't softened it or redirected her away from it. She thought about the choice she'd been carrying alone for 6 weeks. The weight of it. "I'll give you the access information," she said. But I want one thing. Tell me. When this is over, when there's a record when it's done, I want Marcus to know it's safe. I want someone to sit with him and explain why there were unfamiliar people outside his room, because he's going to notice, and he's going to worry, and he doesn't deserve to carry the weight of not knowing. She kept her eyes on Damien's. He doesn't deserve to carry anything. He's been carrying enough. Something moved across Damien's face, not quite an expression, but the evidence of one. I'll do that myself, he said. She hadn't expected that. You don't have to. I know. He held her gaze. I'll do it myself. The next 72 hours moved at a speed that Lena experienced from the outside, like watching a weather system develop from a distance. She went to her jobs. She answered Daniel's check-in calls at the times he specified. She visited Marcus on Tuesday and sat with him for an hour and listened to him complain about Nurse Beckett and felt with a physical ache how much she needed him not to know yet. How much she needed one more hour of him just being her brother, uncomplicated, untouched by any of this. She got it. She cashed that hour like currency and carried it with her for the rest of the week. On Wednesday morning, Damien called her directly for the first time. I need you to stay home today, he said. If there's a shift you can't avoid, tell me, and I'll arrange transportation. But if you can stay home, stay home. Her stomach tightened. What's happening? We're moving on Romano today. I don't expect any complications that reach you, but I want to minimize your exposure during the window. Is he going to know it was me? The document will be presented as part of a broader internal audit that we've been conducting independently. Your name is not attached to it. A pause. But Victor Romano is not a stupid man. He may draw conclusions regardless of what the documentation says. That's not a no. No, Damien said. It's not. Lena stood in her apartment with her phone pressed to her ear and looked at the wall. She thought about how much of her life in the last 6 weeks had been spent being afraid of what might happen, and how exhausting that was, and how it was different in a way she couldn't entirely articulate from being afraid of what was actually happening right now. Okay, she said. Lock the door. Don't let anyone in who doesn't use the code word. What's the code word? Bellecourt, he said. And there was something in the way he said it, the specific restraint around what might have been something else, that made her close her eyes for a second. She stayed home. She cleaned her apartment, which had not been properly cleaned in longer than she wanted to admit. She did laundry. She made actual food from actual ingredients. The first time in weeks she had cooked anything more complex than toast, and she sat at her small kitchen table and ate it slowly, without standing over the sink or checking her phone every 40 seconds. And she tried to understand what it felt like to be in her own space without everything pressing down. It felt unfamiliar. It felt like a door she didn't know how to walk through. At 11:42 her phone rang. Victor Romano's voice was something she had last heard 6 weeks ago, and the sound of it triggered a physical response before she could prevent it. A cold rush from her sternum outward. The same response she had felt the night of his call when he said her brother's name. Ms. Carter, he said. She did not answer. I know you're there. I can hear you breathing. His voice was controlled, but the control was doing a lot of work. Underneath it was something coiled and pressurized, the specific quality of a man who has just watched his entire constructed world begin to fall apart and is deciding in real time how to respond. You made a very serious mistake. I think you have the wrong number, Lena said. I think you've been talking to people you don't understand. People whose protection is considerably more conditional than they've led you to believe. A pause. Damien Valenti takes care of problems, Ms. Carter. That is what he does. And once you stop being useful. Goodbye, Mr. Romano. She ended the call. Her hands were shaking. She called the number Damien had given her. Daniel answered on the first ring. He called me, she said. Victor Romano called my phone directly. A 3-second pause that told her this was unexpected. Okay. Don't answer if he calls again. I'm notifying Mr. Valenti now. She put the phone down on the table and looked at it and breathed carefully through her nose, the way she had learned to breathe when her body wanted to panic and she needed it not to. She thought about what Romano had said, Damien Valenti takes care of problems, and about how that sentence was designed to land, and about the fact that in 6 weeks of watching and threatening and planning to take her brother, the thing that had actually frightened Victor Romano badly enough to call her directly was whatever was happening today. That thought steadied her. Whatever was happening today was frightening the right person. Damien called her at 4:17. "It's done," he said. 2 words. But the quality of them not triumphant, not cold, just settled the quality of something that needed to happen. Finally having happened, told her more than a longer explanation would have. "He called me," she said. "This morning, Romano." A pause. "I know. I should have anticipated that. He used a number that bypassed our monitoring. He said—" She stopped, decided not to repeat it. "It doesn't matter what he said." "Tell me anyway." She did. She said it plainly without drama, the way she stated most things. When she finished, Damien was quiet for a moment. "He's trying to put doubt between us," he said. "He's doing it because it's the only move he has left." Another pause, and this one felt different, more deliberate. "I want to be clear about something. What he said about protection being conditional. That's his world. It's been my world. It's not." He stopped briefly, the way a person stops when they're about to say something they haven't said before. "It's not what this is." Lena sat with that sentence for a moment. "What is this? A beat?" "I'm not entirely sure yet," Damien said. "But it's not conditional." She looked at the wall of her apartment. She thought about the 48 hours he had asked for and the 31 it had actually taken. She thought about the code word, about the promise to sit with Marcus and explain, about 2 cups of coffee on a conference table before she arrived. "How much of his operation is exposed?" she asked, because she needed to move back to solid ground. "Enough." His voice returned to the register of information. "The documentation is with the investigator I trust. The accounts are frozen pending a federal inquiry that will look from the outside like a routine audit escalation. Victor has been removed from the organization effective this morning, and his access to every system we operate has been revoked." A pause. "He still has people. The network doesn't disappear overnight. But he doesn't have resources anymore, and without resources, a network is just a list of people with no reason to take risks for you. And the surveillance. The man from the dumpsters. He's been located and interviewed." The word interviewed carried a specific weight that she didn't examine too closely. "He's no longer an active concern." Lena exhaled. It was a long, slow exhale, the kind that comes from somewhere deep, from a place where you have been holding breath for so long, you forgot you were holding it. "Marcus," she said. "You said you'd talk to him." "Tomorrow morning if that works. I'd like you to be there." "Yes." She paused. "He's going to have a lot of questions." "I'd expect so." "He's not going to be easy about it. He's protective. He's going to want to know everything, and he's going to have opinions about all of it." "Good," Damien said, and there was something in his voice she hadn't heard there before, something lighter almost. "I prefer people who have opinions." She almost smiled. She caught it before it fully formed, which was a reflex she'd had for so long. It was almost unconscious. The reflex of a person who had learned that things that seemed good had carrying costs, and that allowing yourself to feel good about something before it was fully safe was a form of debt you paid later. But she let part of it through, just the edge of it. "Thursday," she said. "Marcus's appointment. Already handled. You'll receive a confirmation from the billing office tomorrow morning. It will look like a standard insurance adjustment." His voice was matter-of-fact. "I told you not to argue with me about it until after Thursday." "Thursday isn't over yet." "No," he said. "But the appointment is." She looked at her kitchen. At the clean counters, and the actual food, and the apartment that was hers, that she had kept for a year through 3 jobs and 4 hours of sleep. A space that had felt like a holding pattern for so long, she had forgotten it was also a home. "Damien," she said. She used his name without thinking. First name. She heard herself do it and felt a complicated, fleeting thing that she did not try to name. "Yes, thank you." She said it simply, without ornamentation. without qualifying it or apologizing for it or walking it back. He was quiet for just a moment. "Get some sleep tonight," he said. "Real sleep. More than 4 hours." She looked at her bed visible through the doorway, at the pillow and the blanket and the window where the city moved past in its reliable, indifferent way. "I'll try," she said. She meant it. And somewhere across the city, in the offices of a federal investigator who owed Damien Valenti a very specific and long-standing debt of honest dealing, a folder was being opened that contained $8 million worth of documentation with Victor Romano's name at the top of every page. And Victor Romano was sitting in his apartment on the Gold Coast with a phone that had stopped receiving calls from all the numbers that had mattered, watching the architecture of 2 years of careful work come apart in a single afternoon. And in the hallway outside room 417 at Northwestern Memorial, 2 men who looked like ordinary visitors were leaning against the wall and not looking at anything in particular, doing their job with the invisible competence of people who were very good at being exactly where they needed to be. Marcus Carter had no idea they were there. He had spent the afternoon watching television and eating a dinner that was marginally better than the previous dinner, and thinking about the fact that his sister had looked when she left on Saturday like something had shifted in her. Not worse. For the first time in a long time, better. Like something had been set down somewhere. He didn't know what, but he was going to ask her about it tomorrow. He was going to ask her, and she was going to say, "I'm fine with that voice," she used, and he was going to push through that voice the way he always pushed through it because he was her brother, and that was the job. He reached for the remote, going to say, "I'm fine with that voice," she used, and he was going to push through that voice the way he always pushed through it because he was her brother, and that was the job. He reached for the remote, turned off the light, and slept. Marcus Carter had 3 expressions that Lena could read from across a room. The first was the one he wore when he was pretending to be fine. Eyes slightly too steady. Fractionally too relaxed. The deliberate performance of a person who had learned growing up in the same house as Lena that showing worry only gave the people you loved something extra to carry. The second was the one he wore when something had genuinely surprised him. Eyebrows up, mouth slightly open, the unguarded face of someone whose composure had been outrun by the moment. The third was the one he wore right now, sitting in his hospital bed at 10:15 on Thursday morning, looking at Damien Valenti, standing in the doorway of room 417. And it was a combination of both that Lena had never seen on him before, the surprise breaking through the performance in real time, like a fault line opening. "Marcus," Lena said from the chair beside his bed where she had been sitting for the last 20 minutes building up to this is someone I need you to meet. Marcus looked at Damien, then at Lena, then at Damien again. "Okay," he said slowly, "the way you say a word when it's a placeholder for a much longer sentence you haven't assembled yet." Damien walked in. He did not offer his hand immediately, which Lena noticed. He read the room first the way careful people do, understanding that this particular room required a different entry than most rooms he walked into. He pulled the chair from the corner, positioned it at a distance that was respectful rather than authoritative, and sat down. "My name is Damien Valenti," he said. "Your sister has been carrying something difficult for 6 weeks to protect you, and I told her it was time for you to know about it. That was my suggestion, not hers. If you're angry about how this was handled, the appropriate direction for that is me." Marcus stared at him for a full 3 seconds. Then he looked at Lena. "Who is this person?" "I told you. I heard you say his name. I'm asking who he is." "He's someone who helped me," Lena said. "He's someone who Marcus just listen, please." Marcus listened. He was quiet for the entire explanation. Lena carrying most of it, Damien filling in the structural details when she reached the parts that required information she didn't have. The event 6 weeks ago. The document. The calls. The surveillance. The man outside the hospital. What had been planned. What had been stopped. Marcus's face moved through things during this explanation. Lena watched it happen and felt each shift like a physical thing. The moment he understood what the surveillance had meant. The moment the phrase "loose end problem" landed without being spoken. The moment he understood that people he had never seen had been standing outside his door at 2 in the morning, because otherwise something would have happened to him. When it was over, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said very precisely, "Someone was going to take me." "Yes," Lena said. "To use me. Against you." "Yes." He looked at the ceiling. He did the breathing thing that he did 3 slow counts. The technique he'd developed during the harder months of his treatment when pain management required mental discipline as much as medication. Then he looked back at her. "You knew for 6 weeks," he said. "Yes." "And you went to work every day?" "Yes. 3 jobs, 4 hours of sleep, with a man watching you." His voice was level. "Alone." "Marcus." "Don't," he said, not harshly, but with the absolute authority of someone who had been carrying worry about this specific person for a very long time, and had just been handed the specific shape of everything he had been worried about. "Don't tell me you were fine. Don't tell me you had it handled. I need you to sit there and let me be angry for 60 seconds. Lena sat there. Marcus looked at her. The anger was real. She could see it. The tightness across his shoulders, the deliberate control of his hands. But underneath it was the other thing. The thing that was always underneath everything Marcus felt about her, which was a love so thoroughgoing and so helpless that it sometimes expressed itself as fury, because fury was the only container large enough to hold it. She had the same thing for him. That was probably where he'd learned it. After exactly 60 seconds, he exhaled. He looked at Damien. "You stopped it." "Yes." "And the people responsible?" "Being handled through appropriate legal channels," Damien said. "Documented. Irreversible." Marcus studied with the focused attention of someone who had grown up watching his sister be failed by people who made confident statements. "Why?" "Why what?" "Why did you involve yourself? Why did any of this become your concern?" He paused. "You don't know us." Damien was quiet for a moment. He answered the way he answered most direct questions, without deflection, without ornamentation. "Your sister collapsed in front of me and then apologized for it. And when I looked at the situation she was actually in, I recognized something I had the ability to address. So I addressed it." He met Marcus's eyes. "There's no complicated calculus behind it." "Most people don't do that," Marcus said. "No." Damien agreed. "They don't." Marcus looked at Lena. Something in his expression had changed. The anger was still there, but it had shifted, making room for something else. Something that looked, Lena thought, a little like relief. The specific relief of a younger sibling who has spent years worrying about an older one and has just discovered for the first time that she had not been entirely alone. "Thursday's appointment," Marcus said. "The billing office called this morning about an insurance adjustment." "Yes," Lena said. "Was that—" He gestured at Damien. "Don't argue with me about it," Lena said. "I was told not to argue about it until after Thursday. You have the same rule." Marcus almost smiled. Almost. "You sound different," he said to her. "Different how?" He looked at her carefully, the way he always looked at her when he was trying to read something she wasn't saying. "Like something's been set down somewhere," he said finally. She didn't answer, but she didn't deny it either. The conversation lasted another 30 minutes. Marcus asked questions, precise ones, the kind that required specific answers, and he was dissatisfied with anything vague, and said so clearly, which made Damien answer him with a directness that Lena could see surprised Marcus even as he was demanding it. By the end, Marcus had not arrived at anything resembling comfortable, but he had arrived at something that was at least honest, the specific discomfort of a person who has been handed reality and is choosing to deal with it rather than look away. At the door, Damien turned back. "For what it's worth," he said to Marcus, "your sister protected you perfectly for 6 weeks in a situation that would have broken most people. I'm not telling you that to justify the secrecy. I'm telling you because you should know the full measure of what she did." Marcus looked at Lena. Lena looked at the floor. "Yeah," Marcus said quietly. "I know." The days after Wednesday's action moved differently than the days before it. Lena noticed the difference. The way you notice a change in barometric pressure, not in any single dramatic thing, but in the accumulated texture of small moments. She slept 6 hours Thursday night. Not consecutive, she woke at 3 and lay awake for 40 minutes, thinking about nothing in particular, before going back under, but 6 hours total, which was more than she had managed in a single night, in longer than she could clearly remember. She went to the diner on Friday and did her shift, and did not spend the entire time calculating sight lines to the exits. She went to Bellecourt on Friday evening, and Gerald met her at the staff entrance with the specific expression he wore when something had disrupted his understanding of the hierarchy that governed his world. "Mr. Valenti's office called," he said. "You're reassigned to private dining. Permanently." He paused. "I don't know what that means exactly." "It means I serve the private room," Lena said. "It means," Gerald lowered his voice, "it means that whatever happened last week, someone with more authority than either of us decided you're worth protecting, which is not something I'm going to argue with." He straightened his jacket. "Don't drop anything." She didn't drop anything. At the end of the shift, she sat in the staff room and counted her tips and thought about what it felt like to be done for the night without calculating the gap between what she had and what she needed. Not because the gap had disappeared, it hadn't, not entirely, but because for the first time in almost a year, it felt like a gap she was crossing rather than falling into. She called the office cleaning company on Saturday and gave her 2 weeks' notice. The manager on the phone said, "We're sorry to lose you," in a tone that suggested he had never once considered her continued employment beyond her next scheduled shift. And she hung up and stood in her kitchen and felt very specifically the weight of one thing being lifted. 2 more jobs. She could manage 2. Damien called on Saturday afternoon. He had been calling not constantly, not intrusively, but with a regularity that had established itself over the past week, like a new habit being formed. She had started to recognize the specific rhythm of his calls, purposeful brief on logistics, occasionally extending beyond logistics into something that neither of them had named yet. "How is Marcus?" he asked. "Angry," she said. "At the situation. Not at you specifically, though he has opinions about you." "What kind of opinions?" "The kind he forms quickly and holds firmly and revises only on the basis of significant evidence." She paused. "He said you answered his questions straight. He respects that." "It's a low bar." "For him it's not." She set down the glass she was holding. "The federal inquiry, Romano. How is that progressing?" "Moving the way those things move. Slowly and with a great deal of paperwork. But the account freezes are solid, and there are 3 people in his network who've already decided that cooperation is preferable to exposure." A pause. "His operation isn't coming back. Whatever remains of his network will scatter once it's clear there's no money to be made and significant risk of being named." "And him. Victor. He's being managed," Damien said. The phrase had a specific weight to it that she had learned over the past week to interpret correctly. Not violence. He had been clear about that in his way, without her needing to ask directly. Managed meant contained. Meant that every path forward for Victor Romano now passed through a landscape that Damien Valenti had altered. "You could have done it differently," she said. "You told me that." "Yes." "Was it harder this way?" A pause. Not hesitation. He didn't hesitate, but the pause of someone giving a question. The consideration it deserved. "In some ways. In other ways, no." Another pause. "The other way is faster, but fast doesn't always mean clean." Lena thought about her father, who had been a careful man with numbers and an impatient man with shortcuts. Who had told her once when she was 9 years old and trying to rush through a problem, the long way and the right way are usually the same road. The shortcut always costs you something at the end. "Someone once told me that," she said. "Smart person." He was. She heard Damien hear the past tense. He didn't comment on it, but she could feel him register at the specific quality of attention that he turned on details other people let pass. "I'm quitting the office cleaning job," she said. "I gave notice this morning." "Good." "I'm not quitting because of anything you—" "I know why you're quitting," he said. "Because you can. For the first time in a long time." She was quiet. "That's different from someone telling you to," he said. "I understand the difference. She had been thinking a lot in the spaces between shifts and calls and visits to Marcus about the specific nature of what had developed between her and this man over the past 11 days. She was not naive about it. She was not unaware of the complications, the distance between their worlds, the circumstances that had brought them together, the inherent difficulty of trust between two people who had each in their own ways spent their entire adult lives learning to extend trust only as far as was strictly necessary. She was also not the person she had been 11 days ago. Not because she had changed, but because 11 days ago she had been running on fumes and fear, and now she was running on something that had more oxygen in it, and in better oxygenated air, you could see things more clearly. What she saw clearly was this. Damien Valenti was a man who had spent 20 years building walls and called it strength, who had surrounded himself with people who needed things from him and called it loyalty, who had, by his own quiet admission, handled things the other way for long enough that doing them differently cost him something real, not convenience, but identity. The version of himself he had believed he was. She knew what it felt like to believe you were one thing and discover you were capable of another. She just hadn't expected to recognize it in someone like him. On Tuesday of the following week, she met him for coffee, not arranged through Daniel, not in a conference room. She called the number directly and said, "Are you available tomorrow morning?" And he said yes without asking why. And she said, "There's a diner on Clark that has good coffee and bad lighting, and nobody there will recognize you or care who you are." And he said 7:30, and she said yes. He was there at 7:20. She was there at 7:15. They both noted the other had arrived early, and neither mentioned it. The diner was the breakfast rush version of itself, loud fast. The kind of organized chaos that creates natural privacy, because everyone is too busy managing their own noise to pay attention to anyone else's conversation. She ordered coffee. He ordered the same. The waitress, a woman named Greta, who had been working this diner for 17 years, and whose expression conveyed the absolute democracy of someone who treated every customer with the same pleasant efficiency, regardless of any other variable, brought 2 cups and didn't look twice. Lena wrapped her hands around the mug. "I want to ask you something." "Ask." "Victor called me Wednesday, before you called to say it was done. He said something about your protection being conditional." She kept her eyes on his. "I didn't repeat the whole thing to you on the phone. He said that you collect people who are useful, and that once the utility is gone, the arrangement changes." Damien looked at her steadily. "I know what he was doing. I know you know. I'm not telling you because I believed him." She paused. "I'm telling you because I want you to know I thought about it. I took it seriously as a possibility. I ran it through everything I'd seen in the previous week, and I concluded he was wrong. And I want you to know that it was a conclusion, not an assumption. I don't operate on assumptions." Something shifted in his expression, quiet and specific. "Why are you telling me that?" "Because you've been honest with me. About your decisions, about your world, about what's normal in it and what isn't." She picked up her coffee. "I thought the least I could do was be honest back." He looked at her for a moment, the full, unhurried attention she had become familiar with, the kind that made you feel simultaneously seen and steady. "What did you conclude exactly?" he said. "That you're someone who is actively in the process of choosing who to be," she said. "And that's more complicated than being someone who already knows. And that—" She stopped, started over. "And that I find it easier to trust someone who's working through it honestly than someone who claims to have it figured out." Greta refilled their coffees without being asked, and was gone before either of them had to navigate the interruption. "I've been thinking about the foundation," Damien said. He said it differently than he said most things, slightly more careful. The way a person talks about something that matters before they're sure how much it's allowed to matter. "I've been putting money into a framework that doesn't have a shape yet. I know what I want it to do. I want it to reach people who've been abandoned by every system that was supposed to help them. People who are exhausted from carrying things alone." He paused. "I don't know how to build that in a way that isn't you deciding what people need from the outside," Lena said. He looked at her. "That's what you were going to say?" she said. "Yes. Because that's the problem with money and good intentions and no experience of actually being in the situation. She held his gaze. You need someone who's been inside it, who knows what the gap actually feels like from the bottom, not from above. Yes, he said again. She looked at her coffee. She thought about the women she had worked alongside at the diner, the ones with the same 4 hours of sleep eyes, the same calculation running constantly behind the pleasant neutral face, the same mathematics of gap and need. She thought about what it would have meant to have something real in that gap. Not charity, she understood viscerally why charity felt like diminishment, but something structural. Something that assumed your capability and worked with it rather than around it. She thought about the restaurant ideas she had been carrying in the back of her mind for 3 years. The ones she took out and looked at sometimes on the bus rides home. The ones that had never progressed past the taking out and looking at stage, because there was never any runway. I have some thoughts, she said, about what that gap actually feels like. I would like to hear them, Damien said. She looked up at him. All of them, he said. However long it takes. She almost smiled again. This time she let it through. Not all of it. Just the edge. But the edge was real. They stayed in that diner for 2 hours. Greta refilled their coffees 3 times and said nothing about it, which was the most professional service either of them had received in recent memory. Lena talked about the gap, the way she knew it specifically structurally, with the precision of someone who had lived inside it long enough to understand its architecture. Damien listened with the concentrated attention of a man who was learning something he had decided mattered, and asked questions that were specific rather than general, and pushed back twice on things she said, in ways that made her push back on his pushback. And both times, the back and forth arrived somewhere neither of them had started. It was the most substantive conversation she had had with another person in a very long time. She recognized on the bus ride to her Bellacourt shift afterward that she was going to have to be careful about that. About the specific pleasure of being listened to by someone who pushed back intelligently. About how much she had missed it without knowing she was missing it. About what it meant that the person providing it was Damien Valenti, who existed in a world that overlapped hers, only in the specific accident of a Friday night 11 days ago. She was going to have to be careful. She was going to have to be honest with herself about what she was walking toward. She had always been good at that. She was less sure this time that the honest answer was the one she expected. Victor Romano made one more move. It happened on Thursday evening, 11 days after Wednesday's action, and it arrived not as a threat or a contact, but as a leak. A carefully worded anonymous communication to a local journalist that contained selected portions of documentation from Damien's organization, stripped of the context that would have explained Romano's role, and framed in a way designed to implicate Damien in the broader financial operation rather than as its target. Damien found out at 8:14 Thursday evening. He called Lena at 8:17. Romano moved, he said when she picked up. She heard it in his voice immediately. Not anger, which she might have expected, but something quieter and harder. The voice of someone who has just confirmed a thing they already knew was possible and is now deciding what to do with the confirmation. What did he do? He told her. She sat with it for a moment. Is it going to hold? Legally, no. The documented chain of evidence is ironclad, and I have an investigator who can counter the narrative with specifics. Publicly. He paused. Publicly, it depends on how it's reported. The journalist is good. She's honest. She'll follow the real story once she has access to the full documentation. But there's a window where the initial framing does damage regardless. What's the window? 48 to 72 hours, until the counter documentation is in the journalist's hands. Is that happening? Tonight. My legal team is preparing it now. Then that's what matters. She said it plainly without performance. The initial framing does damage to your reputation. Your reputation survives it if the documentation is clean and the journalist is honest. You said she was. She is. Then you wait. You don't move against him again because he wants you to move. He's trying to provoke you into doing something that validates the narrative he's building. She paused. This is the last thing he has. He knows the operation is gone. He knows the legal exposure. This is a man trying to take something with him on the way out the door. Damien was quiet for a moment. You're right, he said. I know. She heard something in the silence that followed something specific and unguarded that she didn't examine too closely because it would have required her to put a name on it, and she wasn't ready to do that yet. Get the documentation to the journalist, she said. And then go to sleep. You sound like someone who hasn't slept in 2 days. 3, he said. Damien. I know. Get the documentation out and then sleep. The 48 hours will pass whether you're awake or not. A pause. I'll call you when it's done. You don't have to call me at... She checked the time. 8:30 at night just to confirm you sent an email. I know, he said. I'll call you anyway. She almost told him not to. She didn't. She put down the phone and sat in her apartment and thought about the word careful and the edge of a smile she had let through 2 days ago, and the specific complicated feeling of watching a wall come down in someone who had built it brick by brick over 20 years and called it protection. She thought about her father saying the long way and the right way are usually the same road. She thought about how much road was still ahead. Her phone rang at 11:42. It's done, Damien said. Good, she paused. Are you going to sleep? Probably not. That's not good enough. No, he agreed. And then, after a brief pause that had a texture she was beginning to recognize, tell me something. What? Anything. Something that has nothing to do with any of this. She looked at the ceiling of her apartment. She thought about Marcus complaining about the parking garage view, about the restaurant ideas she had taken out on the bus and looked at for 3 years, about her father at the kitchen table with a green-shaded lamp and a stack of figures showing her how numbers told stories if you knew how to read them. My father used to say that the best thing about numbers was that they couldn't lie, she said. People could lie with them, but the numbers themselves were honest. They always told you exactly what was there. That's a good thing to believe, Damien said. He was a good man, she said. He made a lot of mistakes, but he was a good man underneath all of them. She heard Damien breathe. I think about that sometimes, she said. The underneath part. Whether it's enough. I think about that too, he said. They stayed on the phone for another hour. Neither of them acknowledged that this was what they were doing, but they stayed. The journalist's name was Carol Weston, and she had been covering Chicago's intersection of money and power for 19 years, with the particular tenacity of someone who had been lied to by important people so many times that she had developed an almost physical intolerance for incomplete information. She called Lena on a Friday morning, 6 days after Damien's legal team had delivered the counter-documentation to her office. Lena was between the diner and Bellacourt, sitting on a bench outside a coffee shop on Michigan Avenue, eating an actual lunch, not a half sandwich from a locker, not something consumed, standing over a sink, but food she had ordered and sat down with and was eating in the specific, unhurried way that she was still learning to allow herself. The call came from a number she didn't recognize, which no longer triggered the cold rush it had 2 weeks ago. The cold rush, it turned out, had been specific to that period. It had not become permanent. Progress. Ms. Carter, Carol Weston said. My name is Carol Weston. I'm a journalist at the Tribune. I've been given documentation relating to the Victor Romano investigation, and your name appears tangentially in the supporting materials. I want to speak with you before I publish if you're willing. Lena was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. Then, how tangentially? As a source of original documentation. Not identified by name in the piece itself, the sourcing will be described as a private individual with first-hand access to the financial records. But I believe in telling the people in my stories that they're in my stories, even when they're protected. Lena thought about that for a moment. About the specific integrity of a person who makes that call when they don't have to. What do you want to ask me? Whether the documentation you provided is complete and accurate to the best of your knowledge. Yes. Whether you were coerced into collecting or sharing it. No. And a brief pause. Off the record if you prefer. Whether Damien Valenti's involvement in the counter-investigation was in your direct experience, genuine or performative. Lena sat with the question. She looked at Michigan Avenue at the ordinary Friday morning movement of a city going about its business. And she thought about Damien at 7:20 in a diner. He had no reason to be comfortable in ordering the same thing she ordered. Listening to her talk about the architecture of a gap he had never personally fallen into. She thought about him staying on the phone for an hour because she had said, "Tell me something." "Genuine," she said. Carol Weston wrote something. "Thank you, that's all I needed." "Ms. Weston." "Yes." "When does it run?" "Sunday edition." Lena finished her lunch. She called Damien. He picked up on the second ring the way he always did now, not the first. Never the first, which she had come to understand was its own kind of deliberateness. A man who had spent 20 years being available on the first ring for everyone who needed something from him had learned somehow recently to take one ring for himself first. "Carol Weston called me," she said. "I know. She called me this morning. I told her she could reach out to you and that the decision was yours." "You told her she could contact me?" "Yes." "Without asking me first." A pause. "I should have asked you first." She almost smiled. He had gotten faster at that, the direct acknowledgement, no defensive architecture around it. 2 weeks ago, it had taken him a beat longer to arrive there. "She asked me if your involvement was genuine or performative." "What did you say?" "What do you think I said?" "I think," he said with the careful precision of a man navigating unfamiliar emotional terrain with the same methodical attention he brought to everything else, "that you said genuine, because you don't say things you don't mean." "Correct." A breath. Not quite a sigh, more like something releasing. "Sunday edition." "Sunday edition. Are you all right with that?" She thought about it honestly. About her name not appearing, but her presence existing in the story regardless. About the idea of being part of a public record, even peripherally, even protected. "Yes," she said. "It's the truth. I'm all right with the truth being in print." "Good," he said. And then, "I'm all right with it too." She understood what he meant. That being on the right side of a published record was new territory. That the version of himself that would have avoided all press at all costs had made a different decision, and he was still measuring the weight of it. "Damien." "Yes." "You did the right thing." A pause that was longer than his pauses usually were. "I know," he said. "It still feels strange." "It'll feel less strange," she said. "Give it time." The Sunday piece ran under the headline, "Inside the Romano Network: How a Trusted Insider Built an Empire Within an Empire." Carol Weston had written it with the clean structural clarity of someone who understood that the facts organized correctly were more devastating than any additional language. Victor Romano's operation was laid out from its earliest transactions to its intended scope. The documentation was cited as extensive and independently verified. Damien Valenti was described as the party who had initiated the internal audit that uncovered the operation and had subsequently cooperated fully with the federal investigation. The phrase "cooperated fully" appeared twice. Damien's communications director told him it was the best possible outcome given the circumstances. Damien read the piece alone at his desk on Sunday morning and sat with it for a while afterward. Not because it required more processing. He had already processed the information, he had lived through its collection and organization and delivery. But because there was something about seeing it in print that made it real in a different register. Permanent in a way that his own internal accounting of events could never be. He had done this, not the version of himself that had operated by the logic of his world for 20 years. A different version. One he was still assembling, still testing the edges of, still uncertain about, in the specific way that new things are uncertain before they've been used enough to prove their weight. He called Lena. She answered on the second ring. "I read it," he said. "So did I." "It's good work. She's a good journalist." "Yes." A pause. "How do you feel?" He considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Like something that needed to be settled has been settled." Another pause. "And like the thing that comes after settling is less familiar than I expected." "What do you mean?" "I mean I've spent a long time in motion," he said. "Problem to problem, Threat to response. I'm not sure I know what to do with the absence of an immediate problem. That's not an absence, Lena said. That's just regular life. Most people live there. I'm aware of that. Are you? He was quiet for a moment. I'm learning to be. She was standing in her kitchen when he called, which had become a familiar geography for her. The small kitchen where she had stood for a year, calculating gaps, and was now standing to talk to a person who had arrived in her life through an accident of Friday night and had not subsequently left. She thought about what Marcus had said, "You sound different." She thought about the edge of a smile she had let through twice now, and the third time she had let through a little more, and how each time it felt slightly less like a risk and slightly more like just a thing she did. She thought about the restaurant ideas, about the 2 hours in the diner, about Damien saying all of them however long it takes. I want to show you something, she said. Are you available this afternoon? Yes. I'm going to text you an address. Come at 2. What is it? Something I've been carrying around for 3 years. She paused. I want to take it out and look at it with someone else for once. The address was a commercial space on a street in Logan Square that she had walked past approximately 300 times over the past 3 years. It was empty now, had been empty for 7 months, according to the sign in the window, and the bones of it were exactly right. She had known they were exactly right since the first time she walked past it, the way you sometimes know a thing immediately and completely before you have any practical basis for the knowledge. Damien arrived at 1:58. He looked at the space through the window, then at her. Tell me. She told him. Not the polished version, not the abbreviated version. She might have given someone she was trying to impress or convince. The real version, the full 3 years of it. The ideas she had developed in the gaps between shifts and the numbers she had run in her head on the bus and the specific vision she had for what a place like this could be and who it could serve and why she believed there was something important missing in this part of the city. She talked about food that was real rather than decorative. About the women from the diner with the 4 hours of sleep eyes. About what it meant to give someone not just a meal, but an experience of being worth feeding properly. About the employment model she had thought through, bringing in women who needed hours and income, and treating them as professionals rather than overhead costs, the way Bellecourt had never treated her. She talked for 23 minutes without stopping. When she finished, Damien was looking at the space through the window with an expression that she had not seen on him before. Not the strategic assessment she recognized, not the careful weighing of information, but something more immediate. Something that looked like recognition. This is what you were thinking about, he said on the bus. All those nights. Yes. When you were running the numbers on Marcus's treatment. I compartmentalize, she said. The numbers for survival went in one column. The numbers for this went in another. I kept them separate. I had to keep them separate, or the second column would have felt like cruelty. He turned to look at her. It doesn't feel like cruelty now. No, she said. Now it feels like the next thing. He looked back at the space. What do you need? I'm not asking you for. I know you're not asking. He turned to face her fully. I'm asking what you need. To do this. Your way. On your terms. Lena looked at him. She thought about every powerful man who had offered her something and the specific cost that had always arrived eventually with the offer. She thought about what Damien had said in the conference room. You're not obligated to me. You haven't been obligated since I caught you Friday night. She thought about the fact that in 3 weeks that sentence had not been revised. I need a co-signer on a commercial lease, she said. Because my credit history is exactly what you'd expect from someone who has spent the last year in survival mode. I need a small operating loan that I intend to pay back on a formal schedule with terms that we agree on in writing. She held his gaze. And I need it to be mine. Not a project. Not a foundation initiative. Mine. Yes, he said. To all of it. To all of it. He paused. Especially the last part. She exhaled. She looked at the space. 3 years of looking at it from the outside, and now she was standing in front of it with a person who had said yes to the terms she had set, and the gap between the bus window and this moment felt like a distance that should have taken longer to cross, and had somehow, through a series of events she could not have predicted on any of those bus rides home, crossed itself in 23 days. "I'm scared," she said. She said it plainly without self-consciousness, because she had learned in the past 3 weeks that plainness with this particular person produced better results than performance. "I know," Damien said. "Is that supposed to be reassuring?" "No," he said. "It's supposed to be honest. You've been afraid before. You worked 3 jobs and hid evidence in your jacket lining and visited your brother every week and kept going. Being afraid of something you want is different from being afraid of something that threatens you." He looked at her steadily. "One kind of fear means you're in danger. The other kind means you're alive." She stood with that for a moment. Then she took out her phone and took a photograph of the space number and the rental contact in the window. First step. The Romano story's second wave hit in the 3rd week of October, when the federal investigation produced its first formal charges. The charges were filed on a Tuesday, covered extensively by Wednesday morning, and by Thursday, the name Victor Romano had moved from the business section to the front page, where it sat alongside a photograph of a man who looked in newsprint considerably diminished from the person who had called Lena's phone and told her she had made a serious mistake. She read the article in her kitchen with actual coffee in an actual mug standing, because she had always stood to read things, and some habits persisted, regardless of circumstances. And when she reached the paragraph that detailed the 2-year scope of the financial operation and the role of an internal audit in its exposure, she thought about a page of numbers that had slipped from a forgotten folder at a catering event, and about the specific cost of picking it up. She put down the article. She picked up her phone and called Marcus. He answered with, "I saw it." "I know. He's actually going to face charges." "Yes." A pause. "Lena." "Yes. You did that." His voice had the quality it got when he was feeling something large and was managing it the same way she managed large things, precisely with significant internal effort. "Not just you, but you started it, by finding that paper, by keeping it." "I almost destroyed it," she said. "About 12 times. But you didn't." "No. Because you're you," Marcus said. "Because you don't throw away things that matter even when keeping them is the harder option." A pause. "I've been thinking about that a lot lately. About how that's also what you did with me for years." Lena was quiet. "I know I give you a hard time," he said. "About not letting me help. About handling everything alone. But Lena, I know what it cost you. I've always known. I just didn't know how to tell you that I knew without making it worse." "Marcus." "I'm saying it now," he said firmly. "Let me say it now. You kept me in that treatment program when every logical argument said you couldn't afford it. You kept working when any reasonable person would have stopped. You kept the evidence when it would have been safer to destroy it." His voice steadied. "You are the least invisible person I have ever known. The fact that nobody saw it doesn't change what you were doing." She pressed her fingers against her eyes. She was not going to cry in the kitchen before a Bellacourt shift. She was absolutely going to cry in the kitchen before a Bellacourt shift. "Thank you," she managed. "Also," Marcus said, his voice shifting to the register he used when he was returning to solid ground deliberately. "That man is coming to see me again on Saturday, and I have more questions for him." She laughed. The laugh surprised her, short and real, and slightly undone. "He knows." "Good. He should come prepared. I'll tell him." She told Damien that evening. He received the information about Marcus's additional questions, with something that had become increasingly legible to her over the past weeks, a quality of being quietly pleased that he had not quite learned to fully conceal. "What kind of questions?" "The detailed kind. The kind where he's read up on the topic and shows up with specific follow-up points." She paused. "He likes you for what it's worth. He wouldn't bother with the questions if he didn't." "I know," Damien said. "And then, I like him too." She had not expected that. Not because it was implausible, but because Damien stated preferences with such careful economy that each one still arrived with a slight quality of surprise. "Don't tell him that, he'll use it." "I'm aware." She moved toward Bellacourt in the October evening and thought about the word aware and how much it covered in his usage. He was aware of so many things she had not expected him to be aware of. It had become over the past weeks one of the organizing facts of her understanding of him that the version of Damien Valenti that the world knew, the feared and impenetrable and architecturally defended version, existed in direct proportion to how much the actual person inside it noticed. He noticed everything. He just hadn't always known what to do with what he noticed. She was beginning to think that was changing. The lease was signed on a Thursday in November. Lena signed it at a table in a lawyer's office in the Loop, a lawyer Damien used for legitimate business, which had been the subject of some internal recalibration on the lawyer's part, based on his expression when he met her, and Damien co-signed with the particular unhurried pen stroke of someone who had signed important documents so many times that the significance of the act lived in the content, not the ceremony. When it was done, Lena sat looking at her copy for a moment. Her name at the top, her restaurant, her terms. "How does it feel?" Damien asked. She thought about how to answer that honestly. "Like standing at the top of a staircase I've been climbing for 3 years, she said. "And realizing the climbing was the part I was good at, and now I have to learn what comes after the climbing." "You'll be good at that too." "You don't know that. I know how you handle difficulty," he said. "I have specific evidence." He paused. "The hardest part of any new thing is not the new part. It's letting go of the identity that was built around the old part." She looked at him. "You're talking about yourself." "I'm talking about both of us," he said. She sat with that. It was the most direct he had been about the parallel. About the fact that what was happening with the foundation, with the legal restructuring of his businesses, with the deliberate and often uncomfortable process of becoming someone different than the person 20 years of choices had made him, was happening in the same time frame as what was happening with her. That they were in some way, she had not fully named yet, doing this at the same time. The renovation on the Logan Square space began the following week. Lena was there every day, not because she had the construction knowledge to supervise, but because it was hers, and she needed to watch it become what she had seen it being in her mind for 3 years. She made decisions about layout and materials, with the same precision she brought to financial calculations, which consistently surprised the contractor who had arrived expecting a first-time restaurateur with aesthetic preferences, and discovered instead someone who had been running the numbers on this particular operation for longer than he had been working on this particular block. Damien came twice. The first time he stood in the space and looked at the bones of what it was becoming, and asked 3 questions that were exactly the right questions, which she answered with the specificity he had come to expect. The second time he came in the evening when the crew had gone home, and the space was quiet, and they stood in the middle of it, and she walked him through the vision in the present tense rather than the future. "This is where the counter goes. This is why the kitchen is open. This is the table nearest the window that gets the morning light and will be the one everybody wants." And he listened with the full attention she had come to think of as the most honest thing about him. "You've thought about the morning light," he said. "I've thought about everything." "I know." He looked at her. "I want you to know something." "Tell me." "When I caught you in that dining room," he said, "I thought I understood what I was looking at. An exhausted person in a difficult situation. A problem with a clear solution." He paused. "I was wrong about what I was looking at." "What were you looking at?" "Someone who was going to do something with her life that mattered," he said. "With or without anyone's help. With or without the situation resolving itself in her favor. I didn't change the direction you were going. I just removed some of what was in the way." Lena looked at him in the quiet of the half-built restaurant. At the face that had spent 20 years being something other than this, something harder, more defended, more architecturally impenetrable, and was now in the space between one version of itself and another, showing her the underneath part. She thought about what she had said to him on the phone, the underneath part, whether it's enough. She thought about what he had said back. "I think about that too. You didn't just remove things," she said. "You changed the way I understood what I was capable of." He was quiet. "When I was running 3 jobs," she said, "I thought I was managing, surviving. I thought the goal was to maintain, to keep Marcus in treatment and keep the rent paid and not let anything collapse. I thought that was what strength looked like." She paused. I didn't know I was allowed to want more than maintenance. I had forgotten there was more than maintenance. You hadn't forgotten, he said. You were just waiting for enough room. You gave me room. You were going to make it regardless. Maybe, she said, but not like this. Not this fast. Not with... She stopped, started over. Not with someone in it with me. The sentence landed in the space between them and sat there, and neither of them moved for a moment, and Lena felt the specific weight of something that had been building for 6 weeks in the careful increments of 2 cups of coffee and phone calls and honest sentences, and 1 hour on the phone that neither of them had acknowledged for what it was. I'm in it, Damien said, quietly, completely. She looked at him. I want to be clear about that, he said. Not the foundation, not the lease, not the situation that started in a dining room. He held her gaze. I'm talking about this, whatever this is. We should probably figure out what this is, she said. Probably. That seems like a conversation that requires more than a construction site. It does. A pause. Are you available Saturday? Marcus has questions for you Saturday. After Marcus. She almost smiled. She let it through fully this time. No edge held back the whole thing, and watched something happen in his expression that she had never seen on a person's face directed at her before, the specific, unguarded quality of a man who has just seen something he was not prepared for and has decided completely not to look away. After Marcus, she said. The restaurant opened on a Wednesday in February, not with a grand opening. Not with a party or a press release or any of the ceremonies that restaurants used to announce themselves. It opened the way Lena had always planned it, opening quietly with the lights on and the door unlocked and the food ready, and the first person who walked in off the street was a woman in her 40s with the specific eyes and the specific jaw set of someone who had been awake since 5 and was not sure she deserved to sit down. Lena seated her at the table by the window. The one with the morning light. The woman ordered coffee and eggs, and ate with the focused, slightly defensive attention of someone who had forgotten what it was like to eat without calculating the cost. When she was done, she looked up at Lena and said, "This is good." "Thank you," Lena said. "I mean the whole thing, not just the food." The woman looked around. "It feels like somewhere I'm allowed to be." Lena looked at her. At the tired eyes and the jaw set and the woman underneath all of it, who was sitting in a chair in a warm room in February, eating real food and saying out loud that she was allowed to be somewhere. She thought about a Friday night and a tray of water glasses and a question she had not expected. "Have you eaten today? You're allowed to be here," Lena said. "Come back whenever you want." Damien arrived at 11. I was not there in any official capacity. He was not there as an investor or a co-signer or a person with any formal stake in what was happening. He walked in wearing the same dark coat and ordered coffee from the woman Lena had hired first, a former diner coworker named Patricia, who had the 4 hours of sleep eyes and was currently for the first time in 4 years working one job that paid enough to make the mathematics work, and sat at the counter and watched the restaurant be itself for 20 minutes before Lena came to sit beside him. "How does it feel?" he asked. The same question he had asked in the lawyer's office. She had given him the staircase answer then. About the climbing and what came after. She sat beside him in her restaurant on its first morning and looked at the room at Patricia, moving with the unhurried competence of someone who had been waiting for work that treated her like a professional at the table by the window, where the morning light fell, exactly where she had always known it would fall, at the door. That was open, and the sign that said, "Open," and the fact that people were walking past on the February street, and some of them were stopping and looking in, and some of those were coming through the door. "Like the beginning of something," she said. "The best kind of answer," Damien said. She looked at him. At the man who had spent 20 years being the most feared thing in every room he entered, and was now sitting at her counter with coffee he had ordered himself from a woman who hadn't recognized him and hadn't needed to. She thought about what Marcus had said on the phone, "You sound different." She thought about the underneath part. She thought about 2 people in a half-built restaurant in November, and one sentence, "I'm in it," that had been followed by everything that came after. The Saturday conversation, after Marcus's questions, which had lasted 4 hours, and covered things she had not said out loud to another person in years. The Sunday morning phone calls that had become, without negotiation or announcement, simply what Sunday mornings were. The specific and evolving knowledge of another person, their particular silences, their tells, the way someone who had spent 20 years being impenetrable showed trust in the incremental grammar of small, honest moments. She thought about the distance between the bus window and now. "Damien," she said. "Yes. I need you to know something." He turned on the stool to face her. The full attention, the unhurried quality of a man who had learned later than most that the most important things required more than half of yourself. "Whatever I become," she said. "From here, the restaurant, the foundation work, whatever comes next, none of that changes what I understand about where I started and what it cost to get here." She held his gaze. "I'm not going to become someone who forgets what the gap feels like from the bottom. And I'm not going to become someone who doesn't acknowledge who stood in it with me." He looked at her for a long moment. "That goes both ways," he said. She knew it did. She knew it in the specific and verifiable way she knew things, not on assumption, but on evidence. 3 months of evidence accumulated in the small, honest increments of two people, learning to trust a territory. They had both, for different reasons, and through different damage believed was not available to them. "I know," she said, outside the door of the restaurant on a Wednesday morning in February. Chicago moved through the cold with the reliable indifference of a city that did not stop for anyone. People on their way to their first jobs. People coming from their last. People in the gap between survival and something more than survival. Navigating the distance by feel without maps. The way most people navigated the most important distances of their lives. Inside, the morning light fell on the table by the window. Patricia moved between tables, with the ease of a person finally working at her actual level. The woman with the tired eyes came back. She sat at the same table. She ordered the same thing. And this time she stayed for an hour, not because she needed to, but because she wanted to, because something about this particular room made wanting to stay feel like something she was allowed. And at the counter, 2 people sat with coffee, going slightly cold between their hands, talking about nothing consequential, and everything that mattered, the way 2 people talk when they have stopped performing composure for each other and started simply being in the same room. Lena Carter had not set out to change the most feared man in Chicago. She had set out to pay her brother's medical bill and survive the week. But survival, it turned out, was not the ceiling. It was the floor, the minimum, the starting point, the thing you stood on before you looked up and decided what you were actually building. She had spent a year looking down, making sure the floor held. Now she was looking up. And Damien Valenti, who had spent 20 years at the top of every room and had somehow ended up in the end being reached by the person no one had ever thought to look at, had learned the only lesson that his money and his power and his 2 decades of impenetrable control had never been able to teach him, that the most dangerous thing in the world was not a man with power. It was a woman who had already survived everything.